hearts and our minds. At the same time, we were buoyed by the explosion of solidarity that many of us witnessed on college campuses and in the streets all around us. People were speaking out against settler colonial violence and reckoning with their own complicity with the military regimes and weapons manufacturers that facilitate this genocide. Our theme this year, Scales of Solidarity, is meant to index how Puerto Ricans have long connected their struggles against US colonial rule with other struggles against colonialism, racism, and military violence around the globe. It's also meant to index the ways that Puerto Ricans have often found themselves at the center of international solidarity campaigns. We can think about Vieques, Ricky Renuncia, all of these events. This moment of genocide and rising fascism demands our commitment to liberation, not only for ourselves, but for all. Because as the Black freedom movement has taught us, and the Palestinian liberation struggle reminds us in this moment, none of us are free until all of us are free. It is our hope that this conference can serve not only as a space for us all to gather and process what these past 10 months have meant and how they fundamentally reshaped our political landscape, but to also steal away together in collectivity and think about what it means for us to be in true and meaningful solidarity as scholars, as activists, and as people. As we thought about keynotes in light of the theme, Ileana Rodríguez Silva immediately came to mind for many of us. As we consider her path-breaking work in silencing race, to her most recent work on Cimarron's citizenship, we knew that we would have much to learn from her today. As an aside, I will also say that I have always appreciated Ileana's incredible generosity and openness as a scholar. She is a model for many of us trying to navigate academia in a more humane way, rooted in connection and in solidarity. And I'm sure that the graduate students who were here yesterday and participated in the pre-conference workshop, which Ileana so graciously joined us at, would agree. So just in light of a bio, I'm sure many of us know as as Daniel has been calling Ileana the Matatana. So, but so needs no introduction, but I'm gonna go ahead and give one anyway. Ileana Rodríguez Silva is the Lawrence J. Roseman Endowed Professor in the Department of History at the University of Washington, where she teaches Latin American and Caribbean history. She holds a BA in history from the UPR, Rio Piedras, and earned an MA in Latin American Studies and an MA and PhD in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was like, all right, where's the Midwest Mafia? Her research focuses on the topics of race-making, slavery, colonialism, imperial formations, and nation-building processes in the transatlantic context of the 19th and 20th centuries. Rodríguez Silva is the author of the award-winning book, Silencing Race, Disentangling Blackness, National Identities, and Colonialism in Puerto Rico. And her research and writing have been published in books and journals such as the Hispanic American Historical Review, the Journal of Modern American History, Small Acts, Position, Asian Critique, and NACLA. She is currently working on a book project entitled Cimarron Citizenship, Luis Philip de Sus and the Black middle-class politics of early 20th century Puerto Rico. Please join me in welcoming Ileana Rodríguez Silva.
I want to meet that Ileana. She sounds cool, huh? But hopefully I will not disappoint. Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo están? Yeah, I titled Marisol sort of bothered me several times, nagged me about a title for the talk, and I never gave her one. Because I didn't have a talk. But finally, I came up with it, and it's, the title is Decisiones y Solidaridades. And I'll come back to why. So, buenas tardes, thank you. Thank you to the conference organizers for the invitation to partake of this event. but also for all the energy and the labor dedicated to make this conference possible. This is such an enormous job. I do not wish it on anybody. I want to give a special shout out to Marisol, of course, and Taylor, who helped me make all the arrangements for my travels. I'm very thankful to Santa Cruz and the UC Santa Cruz for making the space available and welcoming us. You know, there's people who labor that we don't see, that bring tables and chairs and food. I don't see them here, but I wish they hear my big thanks, muchas gracias, and they get somehow the energies that I want to convey. But most important, thank you for being here. You know, I know that these are busy times. It's not always easy to travel. We don't have money to travel anymore, so this usually is a sacrifice. So thank you very much. And if you need to leave, you know, please, well, fine. Just a note aside before I continue, I'm not a very smart person when I eat. I'm too distracted for the most part. I cannot hear people, so it just doesn't work for me. So this is to say that I will understand if I come across as unintelligible to you and you decide to disengage. So it's fine with me, no pressure. So when I was invited as keynote speaker, I said yes quickly, not paying much attention to what I was asked to do specifically. I was called to support our association, one of the most important sites of collaboration and discussion about Puerto Rican war making. So of course I will say yes, talk, oh yeah, I talk, please, that I can do. It was not until I received a few congratulatory emails from dear friends that it dawned on me what I had said yes to. What do I know about solidarity? I know nothing. This is not what I research. This is, at the end of the day, I am a social historian of 19th century slavery, mutual aid, collective care, relationality, community sustenance, kinship formations are fields of research. Especially in the contemporary moment with feminist and queer frameworks that many of you actually work on. Aurora should be here. Like, what is it that I'm doing here? No, so not me, even worse. Who am I to speak in front of what I consider, to me, is the most distinguished crowd? My Puerto Rican colleagues. Many of my colleagues here, too, are much more experienced than I am and much more accomplished, people with whom I had been in conversation for decades now. So, of course, self-doubt, inner criticism, and panic quickly crept in. So I did what any respectable academic will do. I procrastinated. But I couldn't procrastinate in the normal way, which is watching all Law and Order. And there is a history for why that happens to be. It needed to be an academic thing because I needed to assuage my shame about procrastinating. So I turned to a chapter in my current manuscript project, the one that I frequently have to put aside to tend to the other million things that I have on the pile, no? As of now, the project has become a sort of a critical biography of Afro-Puerto Rican politician, activist, journalist, musician, and poet of the turn of the 20th century, Luis Felipe de Sus. The main aim is to unearth through de Sus' ample work as my principal archive, the doings, the theorizations, and the disagreements within a network of influential Afro-Puerto Rican men and their close allies, most of whom were not for San Juan. They are from Mayagüez, from Ponce, from San Juana Díaz, from Santa Isabel, Villalba, Patillas, as they are struggling for human and civil rights. Let me just stop for a second, because the fact that I was studying men was an issue for me. I had decided that I was not going to do that. I was going to study women. I had started a book that was on women. And of course, because archives work in Puerto Rico in very uneven ways, I ended up always shifting back to this kind of side project, and I'm like, oh yeah, he has become like my uncle, my symbolic uncle. Let me just check on this. And that's how I ended up then doing a project that I had resisted to do. But I'm very aware that that there is here a masculine story that I need to disrupt. I am interested in the conversation among these intellectuals, most of who were identified as negros puertorriqueños, and who are or were simultaneously in dialogue with a broader public, a broader Black public. They were talking to Puerto Ricans at large, and very often they will aside negros puertorriqueños. So they're very conscious that there is a public there, and I am interested in figuring out who they were or who did they imagine that was. This is at once a project of recovery. So I'm trying to find things that are completely lost. I can spend days and days in Ancestry.com. It's a project of reconstruction, as I am slowly rebuilding this world through scanned pieces. But most important to me, it is a project of restoration, to bring to an original state. Or, that's the Seuss word, what later on he will also call a project of reparación. And this is part of a different chapter that I'm not going to go there, but he makes an early case for reparations to Puerto Ricans for colonialism. An obligation, to me, reparación, according to what he's talking about and what I'm trying to do here too, is an obligation to undo the harm previously inflicted, so to bring a sense of justice. That's how he thought that reparación was going to do. Through his historical exercise, I hope to bring justice to this community of intellectuals and activists, not just to honor their work, but to continue building upon the labor they did that has benefited us all, but they undertook because of their experiences as racialized bodies. And here what I'm trying to say, this chapter in particular is about civil rights and the fight in particular for freedom of speech. He went to jail because of censorship. He spent a year in jail. In just 2 years, he was sued 20 times because of what he had written in his paper. So he had collected a set of lawyers that were helping him in all this work. So we don't tend to think that civil rights, at least not in Puerto Rico, have a racial history. This is the place in which I want to know, I want to highlight the fact that it is this Black body that is talking about racism and that is talking about colonialism as a form of enslavement, the one that is being put in jail all the time. So that's why, and he's doing this as he's fighting for all of us to have that right, freedom of speech. So I want to emphasized the term reparación, which together with the concepts of restauración, this is his language, redención and emancipación, constitute the lexicon de Seuss developed and mobilized in his lifelong project of not just fighting against, but undoing anti-Black racism and colonialism. So he does theorize about colonialism as the context that makes necessary the creation of race. He actually speaks that colonialism needs to create an other, and that other is subhuman. And that's the connection he makes then with Black Puerto Ricans and non-Black Puerto Ricans. They all have a history of enslavement. So that's another chapter. So while we know a little, very little about him today, de Seuss was not a marginal figure, but was quite prominent in the political and intellectual circuits of the island, becoming an elected representative to the Puerto Rican legislature for the District of Guayama in 1919. So because of my lack of imagination, I was not approaching this project through the lens of solidarity. So when I was asked about solidarity, of course I'm not doing solidarity. No, much less the lens of scales of solidarity. Although, as I described, all along, I have been invested in uncovering the network of collaboration and support these historical actors built to survive in the public arena, while also trying to make their ideals of freedom a material reality. One additional side of this work is that I want to also look at different traditions, different philosophies and understandings of race that are not necessarily attached to the Anglo world. So here we have somebody like de Seuss, who is reading Du Bois, who is actually in connection with Harlem Renaissance. He knows all these people, but who is actually looking at Latin America. He is actually in touch with a wide variety of philosophers in Spain. He is talking about people in Argentina. So I am interested then on trying to get a sense of what are the most wider spectrum of thinking in the African diaspora in the Americas. As I'm getting ready to procrastinate in my project, that is not about solidarity, I opened my computer file of de Seuss weekly journal, Pancho Ibero, published from 1916 to 1920. That's the moment of his death. And I kid you not, what appears in my screen is a photo I took of a one-page column de Seuss wrote entitled, guess what? Solidaridad. So my procrastination attempt failed. And now I have no other choice but to ask, what did solidaridad mean to de Seuss? Why did he think solidaridad was needed at this moment? In this one article, written between March and April of 1919, de Seuss mobilized his deep moral outrage to demand solidarity with ourselves, with Puerto Ricans. Moral outrage was both a preferred method and a mode to construct and effectively communicate his truth-telling in Pancho Ibero. So this was his modality when he was doing his journalistic work. He was always outraged. De Seuss was incensed in this particular article because we Puerto Ricans, he said, especially Black Puerto Ricans, were not standing with each other and continued alimentando, feeding the US colonial system. Solidarity here is not deployed as a form of mutualism, which is more of a 20th century understanding, but more in a 19th century sense of solidarity, which is a moral obligation to work together to undo colonialism and bring about what they thought constituted their freedom. So bear with me, because I want to take one step back to set up Dessou's conceptual mapping of the world. So how is he here? This is the word that he sees, no? And the problems that kept him awake at night, all of which he discussed in the pages of Pancho Ibero. His were times of colonial war and racialized violence, not unlike our current moment. The parallels are at times uncanny. Dessou's outlook was shaped by the end of World War II and the signing of the peace agreement, El Tratado de Versalles of 1919 in Paris. He consistently expressed his frustration with the limits of that peace agreement because the treaty left European colonialism standing, especially in the African continent. We ended an incredible, huge, enormous war, and we still have colonialism? Leaving colonial structures in place, in his estimation, was a big mistake, as the war had produced dangerous cracks in the colonial foundations. Not addressing such cracks through decolonization will inevitably open the door to revolution. His premier example of this threat that became a reality was the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, a necessary endeavor given the circumstances in Imperial Russia, but unfortunately, the revolution only had brought about hunger, chaos, and death. Why can't colonial powers prevent what is clearly inevitable and provide the necessary means to dismantle colonialism? At a more regional level, Dessous was actively writing against the US occupation of Haiti, Santo Domingo, Panama, and the recurrent interventions in Cuba. He actually also has few pieces that are talking about Mexico. Remember, the Mexican Revolution is still ongoing. In fact, a few weeks after the publication of Solidaridad column, Dessous joined Leandro González Alcorta, a well-known Spanish intellectual in Cuba, long committed to the cause of Cuban independence, in a campaign to help Santo Domingo expel US troops there since the military occupation of 1916. In addition to the coordination of a multinational newspaper crusade and diplomatic efforts of Spanish-American countries in the newly instituted League of Nations, they hope to raise monies to help pay the debt the US insisted was at the root cause of the invasion. For Dessous, the US occupation of the Caribbean was part and parcel of the anti-Black racism in US continental soil. The regular reporting in the US press about the violence US Black soldiers received as they returned from the war put into evidence once again the racism that organized not only US governmental system, but the colonial structures of Puerto Rico. His journal became an important site to denounce US anti-Black racism, not only through his own writing, but by reprinting and translating works by Black diaspora leaders such as Garvey, Du Bois, Cyril Briggs. He also reported on racist legal court decisions. He was very careful about this. The issue of legal structures is huge for him. And police brutality. and published letters from Puerto Ricans abroad who experienced or had witnessed such violence. For de Sus, the journal was one critical site for his solidarity work. For example, I briefly describe how de Sus fulfilled his moral obligation through uncovering, denouncing, and publicizing anti-Black racism and colonialism at the international, hemispheric, and regional levels. De Sus often wrote about his role and duty as a journalist. So denunciation is critical, but that means that it has to come from a journalist, and he theorized what a journalist was supposed to do. It should not surprise us to learn that he, together with his close collaborator, Afro-Puerto Rican journalist Enrique Lefebvre, assiduously advocated for the creation of the Association of Journalists. There had been an attempt to create an association by 1916. I haven't been able to figure out if he's involved on that earlier moment, but in 1918, 1919, they are writing about journalism and the need of an association of journalism. At first, I found strange de Sus' upholding of positivist notions like objectivity and neutrality as core traits of the journalist endeavor. But as a Black man, such embracing of objectivity added a different dimension to his work. It validated his work as a truth teller and helped ground his denunciations of racism and colonialism on core tenets of liberal ideas about knowledge production. And it is through this standpoint, as a journalist, that the press and the, and it is through this standpoint, as a journalist, that the column Solidaridad begins with. He writes, and I'll quote, "We need to make both the press and the Tribune sites from which to give lessons on patriotism and learn to be indignant when violated." The word he uses in Spanish is ultraje. I'm trying to find a better translation, but there's nothing that evokes the sexual nature that is behind that word of ultraje. So I'm going to keep probably using violation as of now. If anybody has any idea, please help me out. The article was ultimately a call for, and I quote, "decisiones y solidaridad. He aquí lo que urgentemente necesitamos." But decisions about what? Solidarity with whom? If de Sus had before called for solidarity with those under the chains of colonialism in Africa and the Caribbean, again, his language of cadenas, here he is asking for solidarity with ourselves, Puerto Ricans. Two recent incidents, which I am still in the process of sort of figuring the details, incited the piece. The first one was what he described as an ultraje to our right to trial by jury, a right in liberal representative democracy dear to de Sus. Throughout the previous 2 decades, de Sus had put his body, reputation, and financial resources on the line to mobilize his network of collaborators to defend Puerto Ricans' civil rights, such as the writ of habeas corpus and freedom of speech, and fight against corruption in the legal system. He actually will write that, somebody, a Black person has been wrongly accused and we need to find a lawyer, and he finds Leopoldo Tormes, who is a Black lawyer from Ponce, and he recruits him, and he narrates all the work that he's doing in order to get this man who has been wrongly accused. So this is the kind of work that he details in the writing. He regularly decried what he called abogadismo, lawyering. that made possible, I know, this is a long history. It's not only today, I know, again. He regularly decried abogadismo that made possible colonial rule and capitalist exploitation on the island. He had un dedo amajao. How do you say that in English? It's like this hatred that he had, an obsession against these lawyers that were politicians, but were also lawyers for US corporations. And they were manipulating legal codes to make possible, the expropriation of resources. So this was a big deal for him, abogadismo. In the Pancho Ibero, okay, let me see them here. Okay. In the Pancho Ibero issues before the one with Solidaridad, the defense of the jury by trial had become also a salient matter. Jury by duty, jury by trial and trade tariffs were the two main issues in the famous insular cases that define not just if the US Constitution followed the flag. To read this work? Yeah. She's gonna help me to not get it bad, yeah. Solidarity. So the last major insular case, Balzac versus Puerto Rico, was already in the works in 1918, although the US Supreme Court final decision came about in 1922. Remember, so he's writing in 1919, so this thing is there. Balzac was accused of libel because of an article he published in the newspaper El Baluarte. He asked for a trial by jury, but was denied. It is likely that the ultraje de Sus referred to was the Balzac case. I'm not sure yet. Whichever the case was, it was a deeply racialized situation. De Sus wrote, and I quote, "Y el ultraje no ha sido personal para el negro, a quien la Constitución le da un derecho que le arrebata bruscamente un mercader. El ultraje es para el país en pleno." So the affront is not only towards blacks, to whom the Constitution had already given rights that the slave traders used to easily take away. This violation is towards our entire country. To my knowledge, Balzac did not identify, nor was perceived by others as Afro-descendant. But the reasoning behind court officials' denials of trial by jury was undeniably racist. Like in the Filipinas, many of these court officials expressed their doubts about Puerto Ricans' capacity to participate in a jury. They thought they had diminished capacity, and that diminished capacity was often attributed to Puerto Ricans' African ancestry. I want to highlight here for a moment that how he always uses the slave trader image, that's another one, that mercader, it's important because for him, that's what the US government is doing. It's still a slave trader, Puerto Ricans, and he will say this often, are not yet emancipated. Abolition didn't really take place. We need the undoing of colonialism. The second incident behind the article was a recent scandal in the Hotel Vanderbilt, that's in El Condado, where staff denied accommodations to few influential Black men. Consequently, de Sous warned his readers, and I quote, "The case of the Vanderbilt Hotel will not be the last," end of quote. In his frustration, de Sous demanded, quote, "to make decisions, and solidarity is what we most urgently need." He addressed directly the segment of the Puerto Rican Black population that supported the Republicano Party in their pursuit of US statehood. As he stated in many of his written pieces, the Black population of Puerto Rico should be the last one to support the US colonial regime, as colonialism only perpetuated their enslavement. Thus, as stated in Solidaridad, there is a deep need to stand with each other and to break away from the chains of colonialism and enjoy, quote, "a dignified life," end of quote. Much like today, the year 1919 was an election year, and de Sous was the leader of what was known at the time the Guayama Revolution, a cohort of nationalist politicians within the Union Party pushing to keep independence alive as a status option. So participation in the elections was a critical act of solidarity. He was successful. He was elected to the legislature and died. Sorry. De Sous was not a radical. He was not an anarchist or a communist, although he sympathized with some principles of these ideologies. Instead, he was truly committed to liberal representational democracy, not because he thought it was a system of equality, but because he understood that it provided new tools to confront racism and colonialism. He was deeply troubled by the rapaciousness of capitalism and leaned toward cooperativism and other initiatives as alternatives of economic development. Regardless of all this more formal political work, de Sous ultimately understood himself as a poet and as an artist. He was a prolific poetry writer with several published books under his belt, and a dedicated pianist. At an earlier moment of his life, he had been a piano teacher and even composed several danza pieces. In fact, there is a performance from the Instituto, sponsored by the Instituto de Cultura, that has some of his danzas performed. In his home base, the Ponce Arroyo corridor, he cultivated an artist community of both professional and amateurs, young and old writers, musicians, singers, and actors, and many of them were women. They were white women, but they were women who were not allowed to perform outside the home or the church. And he had a sense of alignment with people who are not supposed to be performing classical music like him. Unfortunately, de Sous' story is still an overwhelming masculinist one as of now. I hope to disrupt that by investigating more closely the women, especially the Black women, who made everyday life and politics possible. The domestic partner or next door neighbor that labored as sounding boards and made suggestions about alternative actions. The domestic worker living right next door who networked within and across neighborhoods. The mothers with no occupation in the census, but who listened and kept their ears to the ground and knew what was needed and desired. In other words, I am looking for the Luisas de Sous. And in fact, If you look at the census, there's many Luisas de Sus in Juana Diaz. So I have a grad student working with me trying to network and see who are these birds. So we're trying to figure out what occupations they did. We'll see what we can do there. But first on my list is his daughter, Luisa de Sus Cruz, a teacher after which a middle school in the Bronx is named today. In conclusion, today, like 1919, we are in the midst of a very contentious election and major genocidal, global bloody conflicts. Not just the war in Gaza, but also South Sudan, Ukraine, Haiti. I do not subscribe to the common wisdom of history repeat itself. History is a narration to explain our reality, and we, depending on our cosmological knowledge, spiritual beliefs, organize time in different ways to place ourselves in that story. What we do have are unresolved power struggles, crass power differentials, resulting from all and new modalities of colonialism, racism, and misogyny that continue organizing our world. So I want to echo de Sus words. Decisions and solidarity is what we need most urgently. So thanks. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Ileana,
you.
for that beautiful talk. We have some time for Q&A if folks have questions for Ileana. We got a mic.
Ileana, it's so good to see you. Thank you for taking us to church. So my first question is, especially as I observe the room after 20 years of attending Puerto Rican studies, what does it feel like for you? One, to have it on the West Coast, so we don't have to fly far, and then two, to see so many femmes in the room.
Some what?
So many femmes. I'm not going to gender focus. I'm just, yep.
Yeah.
So how does it feel to be here in the West Coast? It is, as a Puerto Rican scholar, is probably one of the most isolating experiences anybody could ever have. There is no, I'm not even in California, so at least you have Puerto Ricans in California. I am in the Pacific Northwest, so it's not that I have a large community of Puerto Ricans nor Caribbean. So it's challenging as a scholar, especially because when you are in an environment in which we're supposed to share work, most of the time goes away. I spend the time just explaining Puerto Rico. So that's always a challenge. On the other hand, and I was mentioning this before here with my friends at the table, it has pushed me to talk and learn about new things. So, for example, I would have never thought of the Pacific world in the ways that now I think about the Pacific. I probably would have never been teaching the Filipinas in the way that I teach the Filipinas now, or Oceania, which is such present in my everyday life. There are new literatures that I didn't have an idea about, and I guess that in that sense, then I was freed to join other conversations. And as such, I think I have grown as an intellectual too. So pros and cons. How many femmes we see? Yes, it's just beautiful. It's the most gorgeous thing in the world. And in fact, I wish the Sus is here right now. You know, that's what I really want. It's like, look at the work that they're doing, you idiot. You didn't see it. But, you know, so thank you for that. So, yeah, Isar. Ay.
Muchas gracias, Ileana, me encantó. Quería ver si podías hablar un poquito más de ese grupo de hombres negros a quien él les está hablando y la noción que él tiene de reparación, porque no entendí que era por el colonialismo, pero entonces, ¿dónde figura la esclavitud en esa noción de reparación? Y si él la toca o no la toca, y a cuáles son esos personas negras, hombres negros a quienes está hablando.
So about the group of people that he is hanging out with now, he lives in Guayama most of the time, and he's in Ponce a lot of the time. He's a close colleague of, a close friend of the Ramos Antonini brothers. In fact, he works with somebody who is a lawyer of the Goudreau last name, which I imagine is somebody that you probably know about. And at some point I have thought of contacting you to see, because he mentions this person several times. Leopoldo Tormes definitely is a close colleague, collaborator. He is at war and in love with Barbosa. It's the series that everybody, or that most people know about this SUS, which is La Raza de Color y la Independencia de Puerto Rico, is a series of 22 columns that he wrote. That series is a conversation with the series of articles that Barbosa wrote in El Tiempo about U.S., la situación del negro en Puerto Rico. So it's like, you can tell how Barbosa is older and scolds him, and you can tell that he has to kind of back down a little bit, and then the next one he comes back to it. He talks to Barbosa all the time. He's fighting with Barbosa all the time. I am trying to, he talks a lot about Joaquin Becerril, who is another Black journalist, especially who does a lot of labor journalism. Who else I have in my mind? His mentor all along was Tomás Carrión Maduro. That's his mentor. That's the person that took him in and guided him for years. He actually, when Tomás Carrión Maduro dies, he reprints a lot of his work, you know. So that's one. Derques is another person that he talks about and publishes about too. So that's some of the names that come. Some of them are familiar to us. Some others I am looking to try to figure out what the census tells me about them, and some of them are actually people that I do not know. But it's interesting to see also the people that are writing, because he publishes what people write, you know? So he's being read everywhere. He's being read in Mayagüez, he's being read in Barranquitas, he's being read in Naranjito. So this thing is circulating, and it's important that we understand how difficult it is to publish anything. And he's publishing this for 4 years weekly. And it's circulating, and it circulates to the United States. So again, he's not a marginal figure in any way. Then you had another question, other reparación. He actually, I have another piece on precisely the connections he makes with reparación. He has this slippage, and the slippage is very intentional, between racial slavery and colonialism. He sees that racial slavery is a form of colonialism. So for him, he's constantly moving about, you know, and when he talks to this Black public that he's imagining, you know, he is always talking to them about, like, this is an unfinished business for us. That's what actually supports the claim of reparations. And he actually is, by the time of his death, he's about to publish a book that is entitled Reparaciones, and it's a research-based book that has all those articles about La Raza de Color and la Independencia, but he did a lot of research of his own. This is personal research on Bolívar, Antonio Maceo, and Toussaint Louverture. For him, Haiti is very present. He has an earlier life that I still have no access to. He was in Paris. He ended up studying in Paris. I have no idea how, when, what he did. That and if you have any clue on how to figure that out, please help me. Because I'm trying to figure out this period in Paris, but that is a period in which Black Paris is growing. No, there is such a scene of cosmopolitan Blackness, that he embraces and rejects at the same time. So Black cosmopolitanism is something that he is kind of, wrestling with. There is something about his economics of frugality that kind of lets him, but he's in that moment, he's born. It's not clear when he's born. Some documents state that he was born in 1873, others said that it's 1875. So he's born exactly at the moment of the abolition of slavery. I haven't yet been able to identify if his parents were former slaves. It seems like they had been already free or born free. I'm not sure yet. That's where I am now. So, does that answer a little bit? And you are from that area too, so whatever you find, whenever you see one of those names, throw it at me. So, any other question? You want to eat more? Yeah, Jorge. This is so funny because I haven't found anything yet that connects the two of them. And I don't understand why. I think it's just that I haven't gone to the right place. I know that it's supposed to be there. Because he actually, I found he goes to New York because Luisa, his daughter, is in New York. I think she lives in Harlem. I found him registered as a donor for the New York Public Library. So, if you are a donor, it must be that you are visiting, that you're talking. So I know that they must have. I just don't have the evidence. Not that we need evidence. No, it's enough for me to be able to say that they're crossing. No, I feel that he's reading Rafael Serra. He doesn't mention Rafael Serra at all. But there is something about the way that Rafael Serra writes about slavery and colonialism in the 19th century that resonates. Josiana, so there is some. So I know. It's like I know you're reading Rafael Serra. Which will be another connection with Chamber. And Josiana, he belongs to two lodges. La de Guayama and the one in Ponce. Common? Yeah, you see, I didn't know that. You see white solidaridad again? Yeah. Remember, these are our collective histories. This is just, it is all of us who are in that research. So that's what we need, that level of collaboration. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Here, I have the mic. Let me give. Can you just pass this over? Thank you.
Hello. Okay, I had a question about his obsession with abogadismo and the legal system. So was he critical of, jury by trial because of something?
No, he wasn't critical of jury by trial.
He wanted it.
No, he wanted jury by trial.
Got it.
He was, what he was concerned is that it's been denied. No, for example, he was incarcerated waiting for one of these legal suits that he received, and his lawyer came in and is like, oh, this is like an habeas corpus case, and they go along and they get him out. So these are the kinds of things that he is doing. He's so aware of the civil liberties that are available right now. And he really wants to use them. He wants other people to know it. Sometimes I dare to say that there's some things that seem so intentional to me that it feels as if he's trying to create or establish jurisprudence with his cases, but that probably I'm stretching it right there. But there's something, especially with the libel situation, the ways in which he publicizes and he talks about it, the ways in which, it seems to me it's like, what are you doing? You're fighting this on purpose. There's something here that you want to achieve. So that's where I am. Abogadismo is something he's troubled. He really is troubled by the ways in which legal corruption takes place. He sees it as systemic, and so he talks about it very often, So, which reminds me of my mom and her anti-lawyer standpoint, So.
Does he talk about it from a race perspective, or does he talk about it only?
No, because these lawyers in his are not. Yeah, okay. No, he sees them as white. Yeah, although I have to be honest, the way that he reads race changes depending on, he's a journalist, so depending on what the issue is, he moves and shrinks what blackness is, and in other moments he opens it up. There's a moment in which, I'm trying to remember which one of the columns is, I don't remember the exact column, but it's like, 90% of Puerto Rican, this goes to your question. 90% of Puerto Ricans are of African descent. They should be, now you all should be, you all are coming from enslavement. Thus, you need to vote for, you need to work for, to decolonize. No, it is very clear, and that so it stretches. His argument about enslavement also moves to. He talks a lot about indigenous enslavement, and how Puerto Ricans. He actually has he talks about mixture a lot as the norm, but. Mixture, for him, mestizaje, it's kind of, I call it a radical mestizaje, because when he speaks of mestizaje, he doesn't talk about Europeans, it's about indigenous people and African people and the history of enslavement and genocide, actually, that brings them together, and that's what defines Puerto Ricans. So that's part of the work that he's using. At the same time, he has an essay entitled Mulatismo, and that's when he's angry at then those light-skinned people who can pass, and he's furious because they are a problem, they actually do the labor of colonialism, and so that's another way in which, so he's aware of these dynamics, of these power struggles.
So we probably have time for like one or two more questions. I was waiting, I knew you were gonna have a question. I was waiting for it.
Of course. He belongs to a barrio, de Barrio Letrada.
Y por ahí va mi pregunta también un poco, retomándolo, Isari, perdón que tuve que salir cuando estabas contestando para tomar una llamada, pero mencionaste a Joaquín Becerril, que me parece interesante porque había una intelectualidad negra, obrera, que era anexionista. Entonces, estaba pensando... Exacto, y eso era lo que quería saber, los puntos de contacto, porque pienso en Valentín Castrillo, que tenía un periódico anexionista.
I know. Valentín Castrillo, didn't he publish a little bit later?
Empezó como en el 8 hasta el 30 y pico, y después...
Do you see, these are the historians talking. It's like, which date is that? Is that April? Is that...
Y llegó hasta los 60, casi el periódico, que ya no estaba así.
Okay. He loves Becerril, like loves him. But he has el dedo amajado with that. It's actually the labor leaders he's angry at. A little tiny, ¿cómo se llama eso? De chismecito. I know, the chismecito. He was his wife, his former wife, the mother of his daughter, Luisa, is Santiago Iglesias Pantin's wife. and they hated each other, but it's like the hatred between the two of them is out of control. They actually, I believe, if I got it correct, I think when he married the sister, Edwiges, I think he actually lived with Santiago Iglesias Pantin, because Edwiges moved from Arecibo, Aguadilla, I don't know, from that area. She moved to the metropolitan, to San Juan, and that in that year is that they got married. So I think he moved in, and then later on they moved out. But Santiago, he goes on and on and on about Pantin. That's his mortal enemy. I know. I am like, woohoo, chisme. I know. And we know how Iglesias Pantin danced around race in ways that were unforgivable to the Sus. Yeah. I think
Last question.
Oh, one more question.
Where?
Daniel? No?
Ah, okay.
Oh. People need to go. I can see it. People is like, I have to go to the bathroom. Come on.
I have a question too about abogadismo and whether he made distinctions between the defensores and the prosecutors, and like the structure obviously has many sides. So, and there's also like legacies of Black lawyers. So like, how did he position different elements of?
In terms of Black lawyers, what we have is like such a small cohort. Leopoldo Tormes is the most well-known Black lawyer at the time, and that's the one he works with the most. Leopoldo had been elected to the. Leopoldo had been elected also to the legislature before, and because he had been so mistreated in the meetings, he decided to not go again. So there's 2 years in which Leopoldo didn't show up to any of the meetings of the Asamblea. So then I found out that there was a proceeding to disbar Leopoldo Tormes. So I think that, to me, it's very clear that when he's talking about abogadismo, he's not talking about Black lawyers. He's talking about a particular elite lawyers. And as I was mentioning to Monica yesterday, many of these lawyers are hired by US firms. My uncle have known Leopoldo Tormes in life, and he always said that he was such a critical voice. He was just always, he's like, he wasn't liked by people because he was on your face all the time. She was the head of the archive in Ponce, which I don't know what has happened to that archive. But does that answer your question a little bit? Yeah. And in terms of judges, and they are all what he considers white people working for the law firms.
Please join me in thanking Ileana and
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.